I still remember the way the light fell across the living room that afternoon, turning every familiar object into something slightly strange, as if I were walking through a set built to look like my childhood home. The lace curtains filtered in a pale, late summer sun, dust floated in the air in lazy spirals. On the coffee table, my mother had lined up small porcelain bowls filled with nuts and dried fruit for the guests, always a step ahead, always performing perfection for other people. But my hands were shaking too much to be impressed. It was supposed to be a happy day. The day of my engagement party. 29 years old, a stable marketing job, a man who said he wanted a future with me, a mother who insisted on hosting the celebration at the house where I grew up. On paper, it looked like everything was finally aligning. Inside, something felt irreparably off, like a picture frame hung just a little crooked on a wall you stare at every day. My mother hovered near the window, rearranging the same vase of flowers for the 5th time. She kept telling me, in that brisk, purposeful tone of hers, that I should smile more, that there was no reason to look like I was at a funeral. She reminded me that people would be taking photos all afternoon, that first impressions mattered, that this was the beginning of the rest of my life. Every time she said the phrase "the beginning of the rest of your life," my stomach knotted tighter. My best friend Ava sat cross-legged on the edge of the couch, scrolling her phone with an ease she carried into every space. She had this way of making herself at home wherever she went, even in my mother's house, which suffocated me. She looked comfortable, almost radiant. Her dark hair fell in careless waves over her shoulders, and she had done my makeup earlier that day, telling me that a little more eyeliner would make my eyes pop in photos. She had insisted on a specific shade of lipstick, one she said looked like I was put together but not trying too hard. She always knew how to translate me for the outside world. I loved her for that. And resented her a little too. She glanced up from her phone and told me that Daniel had just texted her to say he was on his way. Traffic was a nightmare, but he would be there soon. She told me not to worry, that men were always late to things like this, that he probably just needed a moment to breathe before facing my mother. The words landed strangely. I blinked. I asked her why he was texting her and not me. She shrugged, saying he knew I was with my mother and did not want to stress me out. She said he sometimes messaged her if he was not sure how I was feeling about something, that he cared about doing things right. Somewhere deep inside my chest, an almost inaudible crack formed. I told myself I was being paranoid. Ava and I had been friends since university. She had seen me through the worst heartbreaks, the ugliest crying fits, the mornings I thought I could never get out of bed. She had been there when I met Daniel for the first time, at a friend's rooftop birthday, the city humming around us while he made a terrible joke about the lukewarm champagne. Ava had teased me afterwards, telling me that I had smiled too much at him, that he would think I was easy to charm. Weeks later, she was the one who pushed me to go out with him when I hesitated. She told me that I deserved someone who actually showed up when he said he would, not like the men before. She told me Daniel seemed decent, grounded, safe. She had practically thrown me into his path. So of course he had her number. Of course they talked sometimes. Of course. Still, I turned my phone over on my lap and checked it. No new messages. The last one from him had been a short "I can't wait" that morning, followed by a smiley face that felt more generic than I wanted it to. My mother walked over then, smoothing down the front of my pale blue dress, the one she had helped pick out during a long afternoon that felt more like a negotiation than a shopping trip. She adjusted the neckline slightly and told me that I looked presentable now, that the color suited me better than the darker one I had wanted. She said I had a tendency to pick things that made me disappear, and that today, disappearing was not an option. I wanted to tell her that disappearing sounded pretty appealing at the moment. Instead, I asked if my uncle and aunt were still coming, the ones who always turned everything into a quiet competition with my mother. She said they were, of course, they would never miss a chance to parade their perfect marriage and their son's prestigious medical career. She rolled her eyes as she said it, but there was an edge of admiration in her voice too. She had always measured our family against theirs. She added, almost as an afterthought, that my cousin Noah might join later from the hospital, depending on his shift. The way she said his name was different, lighter, almost hopeful. Noah had always been her favorite, the son she never had. She always said he understood duty in a way that I and Ava did not. Back when we were younger, Noah used to come to the summer house with us, and my mother would line up our accomplishments like trophies. Noah's grades, Noah's medals, Noah's medical school acceptance. Next to that, my little triumphs, art competitions, short story awards, a scholarship in marketing, had felt small, almost ornamental. I think a part of me had always known I would never be enough for my mother in the way he was. The doorbell rang once, then again. My mother's back straightened instantly. She whispered that this was it, the first wave, and she told me to stand up and fix my posture. Her fingers pressed into my elbow a little too hard as she guided me toward the hallway. Ava followed, smiling that bright, easy smile she used at every social event. As the guests trickled in, neighbors, relatives, people I barely recognized but had apparently known me since I was a baby, I did what I had learned to do since childhood, I performed. I laughed politely, accepted compliments about my dress and hair, pretended my heart wasn't racing. People told me that Daniel was a good catch, that I was lucky, that my mother must be so relieved. They said things about stability and timing and how 29 was the right age to settle down. Every time someone mentioned how lucky I was, a small, ugly voice inside me whispered, "Are you sure?" Daniel arrived almost an hour later, exactly when my mother was starting to pace. He walked in with an apologetic expression, tie slightly undone, hair mussed in a way that looked accidental but probably wasn't. He greeted my mother first, giving her the careful, respectful attention that had won her over early on. He told her that he was sorry for being late, that there had been an accident on the main road, that he hated to make us wait. Then he turned to me. His eyes softened, and he told me that I looked beautiful. He said it in that gentle, steady tone that usually calmed me. His hand lingered on my arm a second longer than necessary, but I noticed that he glanced briefly toward Ava as he said it, as if checking her reaction. She gave him a small, approving smile. My stomach clenched. We moved through the motions, introductions, toasts in the cramped living room that my mother insisted was cozy, not small, crowded compliments and the clink of glasses. The decorations she had chosen were tasteful in a way that screamed, "See, I did everything right." Soft fairy lights, framed photos of Daniel and me on a side table, a banner that read something about love being worth the wait. I tried to focus on the details. The sound of my aunt's bracelets clinking together as she gestured too widely. The faint smell of lemon furniture polish. The way the ceiling light reflected off Daniel's watch. Anything but the growing knot in my chest. At one point, I caught Ava watching my mother with an expression I couldn't quite place, half curiosity, half calculation. She noticed me looking and shifted her gaze smoothly back to me, her hand squeezing my shoulder as she murmured that I was doing great, that everything looked perfect, that my mother was clearly in her element. Later, after the first round of food was served and the guests were busy with their plates, I slipped away to the small balcony off the kitchen. The air outside was cooler, carrying the distant hum of traffic and someone's radio playing quietly in another apartment. I leaned against the railing and tried to breathe. I thought about my office, the gray open-plan space where I spent my days staring at screens and pretending to care about campaign metrics. I thought about the hospital corridors I had walked last year when my father, the man who raised me, had a heart scare that turned out to be less serious than feared but still left a mark on the family. I thought about Daniel's neatly organized apartment, where everything had a place, including me. Sometimes I tried to imagine my life 10 years from now. Mornings packing lunch boxes, evenings answering work emails while stirring a pot of something my mother approved of, weekends spent visiting relatives. No dramatic changes, no wild dreams, just a steady line from one conventional point to the next. I had told myself that stability was what I wanted. That I was tired of chaos, of uncertainty, of heartbreak. That being with someone like Daniel, who paid bills on time and returned calls, was a blessing. So why did the idea of locking this future in make me feel like I was being gently suffocated? The balcony door slid open behind me with a soft click. I turned, expecting Daniel, but it was my mother. Her eyes darted briefly toward the kitchen, where the noise of plates and laughter spilled out, then back to me. She said we did not have long before someone noticed we were gone. Her voice was lower now, without the public brightness she held like armor. She told me that she needed to talk to me before the evening went any further. The way she said it made my chest tighten. I asked her what was wrong. She hesitated, then said that nothing was wrong, not exactly, that everything was fine if we wanted it to be, but that she would rather I went into a marriage with my eyes open. She said there were things about our family I had never needed to know before, but now she wasn't sure if keeping them hidden was fair. Every time my mother started a sentence with "there are things you don't know," I instinctively tensed. She had a history of rationing information like medicine, only giving me enough to function, never enough to feel truly in control. Before she could say anything else, the kitchen door swung open again. Ava stepped out, holding a half-empty glass of sparkling water, her expression casual. Her gaze flicked between us and she asked if she was interrupting, sounding all innocence. My mother's lips flattened into a hard line, and the moment shattered. My mother shook her head quickly and said they had just been talking about the schedule for the evening. She plastered a smile back onto her face, said we should head back in soon because my aunt was asking for me. Then she excused herself, brushing past Ava with a tension that crackled in the air like static. Ava watched her go, then turned back to me with raised eyebrows. She said my mother looked like she had swallowed a lemon. She asked what that had been about. I told her I did not know, because technically I didn't. But the unfinished conversation sat between my ribs like a splinter. I felt an odd prickle of suspicion I quickly forced down. I was tired of being suspicious of everyone. Ava stepped closer to the railing beside me, shoulder nearly brushing mine. She lowered her voice and said that she wanted to ask me something, but I had to promise to answer honestly. I braced myself, then nodded. She asked me if I really loved Daniel. The question stunned me more than I expected. I had assumed that out of everyone in my life, Ava was the most convinced of how I felt about him. She had watched me get ready for dates, listened to my anxious voice messages, reassured me when I overanalyzed his texts. She had been the one who told me I was glowing after I'd spent the weekend with him at the small seaside hotel, the one with the peeling white shutters and the smell of salt and fried food. I told her that of course I loved him. The words came out on autopilot. It was what I was supposed to say. She tilted her head, studying my face like a detective. She said that loving someone and choosing to build a life with them were not always the same thing. She said she had seen me hesitate, seen the way my eyes went somewhere else whenever my mother started talking about wedding venues and grandchildren. She said she didn't want me to wake up one day at 35 and realize I had built a life on someone else's blueprint. I asked her why she was bringing this up today, of all days, when the cake was already in the fridge and there were photos of us framed in the living room. She hesitated, then said that once certain lines were crossed, it became harder to go back. She said she wanted me to be sure. Then, after a pause so long I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, she added that there were things about Daniel I might not know yet. The knot in my stomach pulled tighter. I asked her what she meant. She glanced back through the glass door, checking to see if anyone was looking for us, then lowered her voice even more. She said that he had told her some things in confidence. That sometimes he felt like he couldn't tell me everything because he worried I would take it harder than she would. She said she was not trying to hurt me, but that she thought I needed to know he wasn't as certain about our timeline as he had made it seem. Something icy slid through my veins. I asked her why he would say that to her and not to me. She shrugged and said that people confided in her a lot, that she had that kind of face. She insisted that he cared about me deeply, that he wanted things to work, but that he also felt pressure from my mother, from his own parents, from the expectations swirling around us. She told me he had once admitted he sometimes felt like he had been swept into something bigger than his own choice. The words lodged in my chest like shards of glass. I stared at her, trying to read her expression. Was she warning me? Protecting me? Or planting seeds? Before I could respond, my aunt called my name sharply from inside, her voice carrying easily through the door. She asked where the bride-to-be had gone, said the photographer was ready for some shots in the garden. It felt like the universe itself was dragging me back into the script. Ava squeezed my arm gently and told me that we would talk later, that it was probably nothing, that she had just wanted me to be honest with myself. Then she smiled that familiar reassuring smile and went inside, leaving me alone with the echo of her words. For the rest of the afternoon, the engagement party played out like a film I was watching from slightly above my own body. Posed pictures under the old maple tree in the small garden. Polite laughter at my uncle's too long speech about commitment. My mother's frantic, proud energy as she made sure everyone had a drink, a plate, a reason to say this was the perfect celebration. Daniel stayed close, his hand hovering near my waist, his smile practiced but not fake. Every time he looked at me, I checked his eyes for that hesitation Ava had mentioned. Sometimes I thought I saw it, a fleeting flicker of something like doubt. Sometimes I wondered if I was inventing it to justify the discomfort that had been gnawing at me for weeks. In one of the quiet pockets of the evening, when guests were busy at the buffet table and my mother was interrogating the caterer about the dessert arrangement, I slipped upstairs to my old bedroom, under the pretense of retouching my makeup. The room smelled faintly of old perfume and another life. The posters were gone, the shelves dusted, but the shape of the space was the same. I caught sight of myself in the small mirror above the dresser, hairpin just so, eyeliner perfect, eyes tired. I hardly recognized the girl staring back at me. I sat on the edge of the bed and let my shoulders sag for the first time all day. The noise downstairs was muffled, like a distant party in another building. For a moment, I felt like I was 16 again, hiding from another of my mother's well-meaning but suffocating decisions. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I assumed it was my mother, so I straightened up automatically, preparing to be lectured about the length of my break. But it was Ava who appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame and told me that people were already asking where I had gone, that my aunt suspected I had run away with the bartender. Her voice was light, teasing, but her eyes looked serious. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. I watched her warily, still thinking about the conversation on the balcony. She walked over and sat next to me on the bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. She said she was sorry if she had stressed me out earlier, that her timing was terrible, that she just panicked at the thought of me stepping into something you couldn't walk back out of without breaking everything. I asked her if there was something she was not telling me about Daniel. She hesitated, then said that it wasn't her place to share his secrets. That if he wanted me to know certain things, he should be the one to tell me. But then she added that I should probably ask him why he never talked about his last serious relationship. She said that story might not be what I thought. Anger flared in me then, sharp, hot. I told her that it was cruel to hint at things and then pull back, that she was making me paranoid. I asked her if she was trying to sabotage my engagement. Her lips parted in hurt surprise. She insisted that she loved me, that she wanted only good things for me, that she had always had my back. She said that if she wanted to sabotage my engagement, I would know. There was a flash of something darker behind her eyes as she said it, and it unnerved me. She took my hand suddenly and told me that she needed me to trust her, at least enough to press Daniel a little. She said that if everything really was as perfect as everyone wanted it to be, it would survive a few hard questions. I pulled my hands away, feeling more exposed than ever. Before either of us could say anything else, there was a knock on the door. This time it was my mother. She pushed the door open without waiting for our response and said in an exasperated voice that the photographer was on a schedule and that this was not the time for emotional girl talk. She told Ava to give us a moment alone. Ava stood slowly, gave me a look I couldn't decipher, a mix of worry, frustration, and something like resignation, then slipped out past my mother. Once we were alone, my mother closed the door fully and turned to me. Her face had lost the performative smile she had worn all day. She looked tired, older, like the mask had finally slipped. She said we needed to finish the conversation from the balcony. My heart skipped. She sat down on the chair by the dresser and smoothed her skirt, clearly stalling. Then she told me something that made my whole body go cold. She said that this house, the one we were standing in, was not actually supposed to be hers. She said it had originally been left to someone else in the family. Someone whose name she did not want to say yet. She said things had changed because of me. I frowned, confused. I reminded her that my grandparents had left the house to her after they died. That was what I had always been told. She nodded slowly and said that was the story we had all accepted. But that there had been another version, a will that mentioned a different arrangement. She said that years ago, she had been given a choice: tell me certain truths and risk losing the security we had, or stay quiet and keep everything intact. She chose quiet. As she spoke, my gaze drifted to the top of the wardrobe, where a familiar, worn shoebox sat. It had been there for as long as I could remember, always just out of reach when I was little, full of things my mother called important papers. I felt a chill run through me. I asked her if the house was connected to my father somehow, to the man who had left, to the years of fighting I barely remembered but still felt in my bones. She shook her head and said that it was more complicated than that. She said it involved someone I thought I understood. Someone who had played a big role in my life. Someone who was downstairs right now, eating cake and smiling as if nothing in the world was out of place. I thought instantly of Daniel. Then of Ava. My mother saw my expression and looked away, as if she could not bear seeing my guesses land even partially close. She said she had wanted to tell me before I got engaged, that she had tried to start the conversation a dozen times, but that the right moment never came. She said that after my father left, she had lost herself, and that the only way she knew how to survive was to make deals, to make compromises. She said that one of those compromises had been about me. My chest tightened so much it hurt. I asked her what she meant. She opened her mouth to answer. But her phone buzzed loudly on the dresser, the screen lighting up with a call she clearly did not want to receive at that moment. She glanced at it, and her entire face changed. She muttered that she had to take this, that it was important, that she would finish her sentence later. Then she stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind her. For a few seconds, I just sat there, pulse pounding in my ears. Then my gaze drifted back to the shoebox. It felt like every nerve in my body was screaming at me not to touch it. It also felt like I had no choice. I stood on the bed, reached up, and pulled the box down. It was heavier than I remembered. Dust puffed into the air as I opened the lid, revealing a stack of envelopes, some photographs, and a thin folder with an elastic band around it. My hands gravitated toward the folder. Inside, there were photocopied documents, some official-looking forms, some handwritten notes. At the back, folded separately, there was a single page that looked more worn than the others, as if it had been read many times. I unfolded it. It was a copy of a will. Not my grandparents'. A different name at the top. A name I knew, but not as family. My eyes moved down the page, tracing lines that blurred as my heart raced. One line in particular stood out, underlined in pen by someone's hand. A clause about guardianship. About responsibility. About assets that would shift depending on whether a certain child was acknowledged or not. A child with my birth date. A child referred to not by name, but by a careful phrase that might as well have been engraved on my skin. The language was clinical, but the meaning was devastating. Someone had known about me long before I understood anything. Someone had tied my existence to property, to obligation, to conditions. And the signature at the bottom of the document. The signature was a name that did not belong in our family. It belonged to Daniel's father. My vision tunneled. The room seemed to tilt. Suddenly, the engagement party downstairs, the house, my mother's desperation, Ava's cryptic warnings, Daniel's sudden presence in my life, everything rearranged itself into a new, horrifying pattern. I stared at that signature, my pulse roaring in my ears, understanding with a sickening clarity that my engagement was not just a romantic milestone. It was part of a deal. A negotiation. An arrangement made long before I ever knew what I wanted. And somewhere, woven into all of it, were the hands of the two people I trusted most. My mother. And Ava. I did not know the full story yet. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. None of this was an accident. I didn't realize I had stopped breathing until the edges of my vision dimmed. I forced air back into my lungs, shaky and uneven, as if I'd forgotten how to inhale altogether. The will trembled in my hands. Daniel's father's signature seemed to glare up at me from the page like an accusation, like a truth I had never asked for yet suddenly couldn't unsee. A distant roar of laughter rose from the garden outside. Glasses clinked, someone called out my name jokingly, a camera shutter clicked. The engagement party, my engagement party, continued uninterrupted, oblivious to the fact that I was upstairs discovering that my life had been shaped by strangers long before I ever had a say. My heartbeat thudded so loudly I could feel it in my teeth. I stared at the clause again. About guardianship. About conditions tied to whether a certain child, me, was acknowledged. About how assets would shift if that child were married into the correct family line. Married. Into Daniel's family. My stomach twisted violently. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't fate. This wasn't some poetic twist of life's randomness. Someone had orchestrated this. I sank onto the bed, the loose papers sliding around me like fallen feathers. My eyes scanned rapid phrases, contingent upon, acknowledgement, beneficiary status pending, marital linkage. Every word felt like a cold hand closing over my throat. My mind flashed back to the first time I met Daniel. The rooftop party. The lukewarm champagne. Ava urging me to just go talk to him with a strangely insistent smile. The way Daniel had seemed so effortlessly comfortable around me, as though he already knew who I was. Then to the second date, Ava insisting I wear the blue top because Daniel would love it. The way Daniel's eyes had indeed lit up in recognition, like he'd been waiting for me to walk in wearing that exact color. Then the third, when he had invited me to his parents' house for brunch. His mother, elegant, polite, smiling too long, had said that I looked familiar. She had held my hand for an uncomfortably extended moment. And she had said something I had forgotten until now: some children are born into our lives long before we ever meet them. Back then I had smiled politely, assuming she meant something sentimental, something maternal. I brushed it off as poetic nonsense. Now it sounded like a confession. My mouth went dry. I heard footsteps in the hallway. My mother's voice, low and tense. She was finishing her phone call. Any second she'd come back and find me with the box open, with the paper spread around me like evidence. I shoved everything back into the folder quickly, but my hands were shaking so hard that the papers crinkled loudly. I shoved the folder into the shoebox, pushed the lid on, and slid it back into its place just as the door handle turned. My mother stepped inside. She looked at me with a forced composure that fooled no one. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glossy. She said she was sorry about the interruption, that she had wanted to finish our talk, that she needed me to understand the situation before jumping to conclusions. But the moment she saw my face, really saw it, she stopped. Her eyes flicked to the wardrobe. To the spot where the shoebox sat, slightly askew now by a mere inch. Her face paled. She asked me quietly what I had done. Her voice wasn't angry. It was terrified. My pulse hammered in my ear. I told her that I needed answers, that I wasn't a child anymore she could shield from the truth, that I deserved to know why my life felt like it belonged to everyone but me. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, like someone preparing to walk into a courtroom. She sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She confessed that after my father left, she had struggled more than she'd ever admitted. Bills piled up. Court letters arrived. Threats from his side of the family, too. She felt like the ground was slipping from beneath her feet. Then someone stepped in to help. Not Daniel's father, not at first. A woman. A woman I knew. Daniel's mother. My lungs froze. My mother said that Daniel's mother, Margaret, had known about me since I was a toddler. She had been friends with someone on my father's side. She had found out about the chaos, the custody battles, the debt, the emotional collapse. She had offered financial support quietly. Behind the scenes. Under conditions. My mother faltered, rubbing her temples, unable to meet my eyes. I whispered the question anyway. What conditions? She swallowed hard and said that Margaret had promised financial stability, legal protection, and help securing this house, as long as I was eventually integrated into their family. Integrated. A sanitized word. A strategic word. A word that felt like it belonged in a contract, not a childhood. I felt something inside me break open. My mother continued, her voice cracking. She said that Margaret had insisted there was no guarantee, no pressure, just future compatibility. She said Margaret had pointed out that their son was around my age, and that if life naturally brought us together one day, the arrangement would be mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial. I whispered it aloud, the phrase burning like acid on my tongue. My mother reached forward, her hand trembling as she tried to touch my knee. She said that she never forced anything, that she never arranged any meeting, never interfered romantically. She insisted that she merely kept the door open. That she accepted the help because she was drowning. But the tremble in her voice told me she was leaving something out. I remembered Ava's strange warnings. Her insistence that I question Daniel. Her subtle hints that there was more to the story. A horrifying thought crawled into my mind. Did Ava know? Before I could form the question, the bedroom door swung open again, without knocking this time. Ava stood there. Pale. Breathless. Her eyes darted between my mother and me. Then to the wardrobe. Then back to me. She saw the shift in my expression. And something in her gaze hardened. She said my mother needed to rejoin the guests, apparently people were asking questions. She said she could talk to me privately. My mother hesitated, then left reluctantly, but not before squeezing my arm in a way that didn't feel comforting. It felt like a warning. When the door closed, Ava stepped forward. She didn't sit. She didn't smile. She just looked at me with an expression that was half apology, half resolve. She said she knew I had found something. Her voice was too steady. My heart plummeted. I asked her how she knew. She said she recognized the look on my face. She said she had seen it once before, years ago, when she had discovered a truth about her own life that felt too big to hold. She said she wanted to help me stay calm until we found out everything. But then she looked toward the wardrobe again. And for the first time, I saw something cold in her eyes. She asked me if I had opened the shoebox. My breath stopped. I asked her why she cared. She took a step closer. Her perfume, floral, warm, familiar, felt suddenly suffocating. She said she and my mother had a rule. They had agreed it was best for me not to be burdened with certain things. She said I was too emotional, too reactive, too fragile. That I needed things given to me slowly, gently. Like I was a ceramic doll that would crack if handled roughly. My jaw clenched. I asked her plainly, bluntly, how long she had known about the will. Her eyes didn't flinch. She said she had known for years. The room tilted. I stared at her, unable to speak. She continued calmly. Too calmly. She said that Margaret, the same Margaret who had helped my mother, had approached her, too. Long before Daniel entered my life. She said Margaret trusted her. She said Margaret believed Ava had more influence over me than my mother did. Something icy crawled up my spine. I asked her why Margaret needed to influence me at all. Ava hesitated. Then she said the sentence that would split my world open. She said that I was meant to marry into their family. That it was decided long before Daniel and I ever went on our first date. My heart thumped once, painfully, like a fist inside my chest. I whispered a single question. Why? Ava took a long breath. She told me there was another clause in the will, one I hadn't seen. One involving inheritance. One involving ownership. One involving a family property of enormous value, tied to the Hart family's reputation, legacy, and fortune. A property that, due to old legal arrangements tying multiple families together, would transfer to me if I married into the family. But only if I married before I turned 30. I felt the floor vanish beneath me. Ava stepped closer. Her voice softened in a way that made my skin crawl. She told me that this arrangement was not malicious. That it was business. That wealthy families made complicated plans. That legacies sometimes depended on marriages. She said I was lucky, that people had lined up my life for me, made it easier, safer, more stable. I found my voice somehow, thin, shaking, laced with fire. I asked her why she had never told me. Why she had let me walk blindfolded into a marriage proposal that might not have come from love at all, but from obligation. Her expression shifted. A crack. A barely perceptible tremor of guilt. Or was it something darker? She sat beside me finally, her tone low. She said she had kept quiet because she had been asked to. By Daniel's family. By my mother. She said the deal involved all of them. I stared at her. She stared back, unblinking. I whispered the truth aloud. You were part of it. Her voice barely wavered when she answered. She said yes. She admitted she had guided me. Nudged me. Encouraged certain choices over others. Worn me down when I hesitated. Soothed my anxieties while pushing me toward Daniel. She said it wasn't manipulation, it was care. The world tilted again. I told her that care doesn't require secrecy. Her expression hardened a fraction. She said sometimes it does. My breath hitched. This was Ava. The girl who held my hair back when I cried over my ex. The girl who slept beside me on the couch when I thought I couldn't face another morning. The girl who texted me daily check-ins, who knew the brand of mascara I liked, who remembered every anniversary my own mother forgot. She had been part of my life for more than a decade. And now she was telling me she had never been just my friend. She had been my handler. I stood abruptly. She reached for me. I stepped back. Her expression sharpened. She said I needed to calm down. That decisions made in panic were dangerous. That I didn't want to ruin the future that had been built so carefully for me. I laughed then, a hollow, broken sound that scraped my throat raw. I told her I wanted to ruin it. Every part of it. Her jaw tightened. She said I was being emotional. She said this was why they didn't tell me things sooner. She said I always reacted instead of analyzing. I told her reacting to betrayal was normal. She didn't blink. The door suddenly opened again. Daniel stood there. He looked from Ava to me, confusion shifting into dread, as if he'd walked in on a truth he wasn't prepared to face. His voice trembled as he asked what was going on. Ava spoke before I could. She said everything was fine. Her lie floated in the air like poison. I looked into Daniel's eyes. And for the first time since I'd met him, I saw fear. Real fear. A shadow of something he hadn't told me. Something he'd hoped I'd never discover. I stepped toward him, voice faint but controlled. I told him that I had a question, and I needed him to answer it honestly. I asked him. Did you know? Did you know your family wanted this marriage for reasons other than love? His face went pale. Behind him, the sound of the party drifted up the staircase, music, laughter, glasses clinking, while he stood frozen, like a man caught in between two collapsing worlds. He didn't answer. Not immediately. Not quickly enough for me to believe anything good. Ava watched him with a strange intensity. My throat tightened. I repeated the question, louder this time. Did you know? Daniel swallowed. His lips parted. Slowly. Painfully. He whispered. That he knew something. Not everything. Just enough. And that one devastating phrase tore through me like a blade. I stepped backward, hitting the edge of the bed. My mother appeared in the hallway behind Daniel, breathing hard, eyes wide, as if she'd run up the stairs the moment she realized what was unfolding. Her expression, when she saw the three of us, told me everything. We were past the point of return. The truth was no longer buried. And as I stood there, surrounded by the only people I had ever trusted, I realized the most terrifying twist of all. I did not know which betrayal would destroy me more. Daniel's quiet compliance, Ava's strategic devotion, or my mother's desperate deals. And yet, there was still one final truth none of them had said. One piece missing. One motive unspoken. Something darker. Something deeper. Something only one person in that room knew. And I could feel it. Pulsing under Ava's calm expression. Hiding behind Daniel's frightened eyes. Lurking in my mother's shaking breath. This story wasn't finished breaking me yet. Daniel's whisper, that he knew something, hung in the air like poisonous fog. Not enough to justify anything. Not enough to absolve him. Just enough to damn him completely. I stared at him, my heart pounding painfully fast, like it was desperately trying to escape my ribcage. He looked wrecked, lost, like a man suddenly realizing that the ground beneath him was not firm at all, but thin ice cracked in every direction. Behind him, my mother's breath hitched sharply. She stepped into the doorway, smoothing her hair with a trembling hand as if grooming herself would help untangle what was happening. Ava stood perfectly still, watching everything with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I felt like prey caught between three hunters. I asked Daniel what exactly he knew. His lips parted again, but Ava spoke before he could form a word. She said he didn't know as much as I was assuming. She said he was simply aware that his parents had expectations, traditions, a desire to align families. She said that was normal among wealthy families, not sinister. I snapped that I wasn't marrying into a monarchy. I was marrying a man who had pretended this relationship was natural. Daniel winced as if I'd struck him. My mother stepped closer, telling me that I needed to sit down, breathe, calm myself. She said she was worried about me, that my face was pale, that this wasn't a good time to process such a heavy conversation. Her words only fueled the fire inside me. I told her she didn't get to tell me how or when to process my own life anymore. Ava moved between us subtly, placing herself nearer to me. The gesture should have felt protective, comforting, but instead it felt like being monitored. Like she was positioning herself to block me if I tried to run. Daniel swallowed hard and said he hadn't known the details of the will. He said his father had mentioned old arrangements, old promises, nothing more. He said he had been told that his family and mine had deep history. He said no one ever told him what that meant. He said he had assumed it was harmless. I asked him why he didn't tell me even that much. He said he didn't want to scare me. I laughed. The sound was jagged, hollow, almost unrecognizable. I asked him if the truth scared him. If he had been afraid that I would see the strings pulling at my life and run. He didn't answer. My mother's voice grew desperate. She stepped fully into the room now, telling me that everything had gotten distorted, that no one meant harm, that people had made choices out of fear, not malice. I told her fear stops being an excuse when it controls another person's entire life. She flinched. Something in me had been building since the moment I found the will. And now it was cracking open, releasing years of suppressed doubt, guilt, and mistrust. I turned to Ava. I asked her how far she had gone. How many conversations she'd had with Margaret. How many decisions she'd influenced. Which relationships she'd quietly broken behind my back. She didn't deny it. She just said she had protected me. Protected. The word tasted like ash. I asked her who had protected me from her. Her expression flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. Then I asked the question I hadn't wanted to ask. Why had she been so invested? Why had she taken on the role of managing me, guiding me, steering me toward Daniel? Her answer came slowly. She said that she had been trusted. Trusted by both sides. His family. And mine. I blinked. Mine? Daniel's mother, sure. She had explained that part. But who in my family had given her permission to manage my life like a chess piece? My mother broke eye contact. My stomach dropped. I asked her directly. My mother hesitated, her breath trembling at the edges. She finally spoke, her voice small, unsteady. She said, "My father had asked Ava to look after me. Not my biological father. The man who had raised me. The man who left. The man I called Dad. The man who chose to leave when I was 6. I froze. The room spun. I shook my head hard, telling her she was lying. Telling her my father would never involve Ava in anything regarding me, especially not after abandoning us. But she insisted it was true. She said he had reached out years after leaving. Quietly. Secretly. He had written, called, attempted to reconnect in the way distant, guilt-ridden men sometimes try. He'd heard about the financial struggles. The court issues. The emotional collapse. He had said he couldn't come back. But he could do something. He had money. Connections. People. And one of those people was Ava's father. My breath caught. Ava's father. A man I barely remembered except in flashes, dinners, greetings, his laugh echoing down a hallway, a tall figure with expensive cologne. He and my father had worked together. Colleagues for years. I turned slowly toward Ava. Her expression was unreadable now. She said she had been 13 when her father explained the arrangement to her. That she was to stay close to me. That I needed someone stable. Someone responsible. Someone who wouldn't leave. She said she took it seriously. Too seriously. My vision blurred. The girl who had braided my hair at sleepovers. Who had whispered secrets to me under the covers. Who had cried with me after my father left. She had been assigned to me. A handler. Since childhood. Tears stung the back of my eyes as I asked her what else she had done in the name of protecting me. She looked away. That was answer enough. Daniel tried to interrupt, saying that none of this changed how he felt about me. That he loved me. That he had chosen me, regardless of what his family wanted. The last sentence snapped something inside me. I asked him when he had chosen me. Before he knew who I was? Or after? He didn't respond. I stepped closer to him, my voice trembling with rage and heartbreak. I asked him if he would have even looked at me twice if he hadn't grown up knowing I was expected to be part of his future. If he hadn't been raised with the understanding that marrying me benefited his family. He closed his eyes like the truth physically hurt. But he didn't deny it. My knees grew weak. Ava stepped toward me again, reaching out, but I pulled away sharply. She flinched like I'd burned her. I looked between the three of them, the man I was supposed to marry, the girl who had been my closest friend, and the mother who had orchestrated my life like a quiet puppeteer. I told them that none of them actually knew who I was. They only knew the version they were trying to create. A silence settled so thick it felt suffocating. Daniel whispered that we could still fix things. I asked him how we could fix something that was never real. His face crumpled. Ava stepped in front of him suddenly, protective, fierce, like she had claimed him as her responsibility now too. She said I needed to stop spiraling, that I was blowing things out of proportion, that none of this changed the connection Daniel and I had. The connection. I almost laughed. I told her connections don't count when they're engineered. My mother begged me to lower my voice, terrified that the guests would hear something. I told her I didn't care anymore. She pressed her palms to her face and whispered that she had tried her best. That a single mother doesn't always make the right decisions. That she had accepted help because she was scared. That she believed these alliances would keep me safe. Safe. Safe from what? That was when I remembered the missing piece. The question that had been tugging at me since I'd opened the will. Why me? Why did Daniel's family want me? Why not another family? Another daughter? Someone with less chaos? I asked them all the question. No one answered. Ava opened her mouth, hesitated, closed it again. My mother shook her head rapidly, whispering that she didn't know the full truth. Daniel looked like he wanted to disappear. I walked to the dresser and grabbed the will. I held it out in front of me and asked them again. Why me? Daniel stepped forward reluctantly, his eyes clouded. He said. The property in question. The inheritance. The legacy his family was trying to secure. It wasn't originally theirs. My pulse hammered. I asked him whose it was then. He looked at my mother. She nodded stiffly. He turned back to me, swallowing hard. He said the property. The land. The estate. The fortune tied to the will. Once belonged. To my father. Not Daniel's father. Mine. My legs went weak. I gripped the edge of the bed to keep myself upright. Daniel's voice trembled as he explained. My father, years before he ever left our family, had been part of a joint business venture with Ava's father and Daniel's father. A venture that promised huge financial returns. A venture tied to land ownership. But when my father left, emotionally unstable, drowning in debt, he signed away his rights quietly, without understanding the implications. And the contract had a contingency clause. If his direct heir married into one of the partner families, the original ownership rights would shift back toward the unified family line. Meaning, if I married Daniel, the Hart family would regain control of the entire estate. I was breathless. Frozen. Destroyed. My mother whispered that she had discovered this only later. When everything was already tangled. When she was already dependent on the money, the support, the promises. Ava whispered that she had known. 4 years. I stared at her. The girl who had been my best friend. She whispered that she had stayed close because she didn't want the inheritance to fall into the hands of the wrong people. I asked her who she thought the wrong people were. She didn't answer. Because the answer was obvious. Anyone who wasn't Daniel. Anyone who wasn't her circle. Anyone who wasn't part of the family she had chosen for herself. Tears finally spilled down my cheeks, not the fragile kind, but the burning, angry kind that tasted like betrayal. Daniel tried to reach for me. I stepped back, shaking my head. I told him I couldn't marry him. Not now. Not ever. Not knowing the truth. His face collapsed. Ava gasped. My mother whispered my name in horror. I didn't stay to watch them fall apart. I walked out. Down the staircase. Past the smiling guests and the glowing lights. Past the photo table filled with pictures that already felt like lies. Out the front door. Into the cold evening air. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked. I heard Ava call after me. Daniel's footsteps behind hers. My mother's voice rising in panic. But I didn't turn back. Not once. I walked until my feet ached. Until the night grew deeper. Until the weight in my chest felt less like breaking and more like freeing. When I finally stopped, I was standing on the same bridge where months earlier Daniel had told me he could see a future with me. Now, all I saw was the cost of letting other people write my story. I leaned on the railing, watching the water rush below. My life, for the first time, was mine. Terrifying. Lonely. Chaotic.